Okay, we are live.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. Before I get started with the topic today, inshallah, I'll give a brief introduction to myself. So I'm a university student studying history and economics at the University of Manchester in the UK. And I am very interested in historical figures in Islamic history in particular, and in drawing lessons from the events that have happened before and sharing this knowledge. And in order to do this, I've created a YouTube channel in which I share the insights that I've learned through reading about history. And inshallah, in this session, I hope to communicate this passion and to benefit the listeners with some interesting insights into the life of a great Muslim leader. And the Muslim leader that I'll be inshallah discussing is Umar bin Abdul Aziz. And what we did in the previous session, we looked at some of the actions that he did within his life for which we remember him, and actions which signify his greatness in the collective memory that the Muslims have of him. And in this session, I want to focus on what actions he specifically did which left a legacy for the Muslims at the time of his death, and why they had such a lasting impact and benefited so many people long after he had passed away. So inshallah, without further ado, I'll inshallah share my screen so you can see the presentation. Okay. So the first thing that we can focus on is the importance that Umar bin Abdul Aziz placed upon knowledge, and specifically on education. Umar bin Abdul Aziz tried to encourage a atmosphere of scholarship within the Muslim Ummah, and to do this, he did a couple of things. The first thing he did was he sent scholars throughout the caliphate, and he funded these scholars to travel and teach what knowledge they had to the different communities that otherwise would not have had access to this knowledge. And that was beneficial because it enabled not only the scholars to have a greater understanding into the real world implications of this knowledge, but also because it enabled people within the Ummah to be equipped with a understanding of the wider world within which they lived. And in an age where there was no Google, or there was no email or social media, this was a very significant conduit into people's knowledge and into people's understanding of the world. And Umar bin Abdul Aziz created a system through which scholars could continue to do this. And this was done through introducing reforms, which meant that Muslim conquest stopped whilst Umar bin Abdul Aziz was the caliph. So before Umar bin Abdul Aziz was caliph, there was conquest that continued, so that Muslim territories were expanded, and the Umayyad Caliphate, it could cover more areas which it could govern and could tax people from an increasing population. But when Umar bin Abdul Aziz became caliph, he halted this territorial expansion because he wanted to focus on improving the education and development of the existing people under the caliphate's control. And this was very crucial because it symbolized a shift away from a conquest and from a plunder and enrichment mentality, and it focused upon the development, the education, and the reflection of the population. And it essentially introduced a paradigm shift overnight. And sometimes there's this focus that's placed upon knowledge itself and how we should acquire this knowledge, but the mechanisms of gaining this knowledge are sometimes not focused on. And what Umar bin Abdul Aziz did was he focused upon them, and he stabilized this process of knowledge gaining, because he not only he funding Islamic scholars to travel throughout the caliphate, but also ensuring that the caliphate was not expanding at such a quick rate that people weren't able to benefit from the knowledge and were simply extracted of economic value from the people without giving them anything back. So that was something that Umar bin Abdul Aziz tried to reverse and tried to increase the education and development of the people. And this was also important because it was something that established a tradition of scholarship. And what Umar bin Abdul Aziz put particular emphasis on was on collecting ahadith. And ahadith were the sayings and the actions of the Prophet ﷺ. And what Umar bin Abdul Aziz focused upon was collecting the most authentic narrations of hadith. And this became a tradition for Muslim scholars, and it led to great scholars such as Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim and Imam Tirmidhi and their collections of ahadith, which were a continuation from the time of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, when he had started funding different scholars to start collecting ahadith. And in fact, I mentioned in the previous session that Imam Malik, the famous Imam Malik of the four schools of thought, he called Umar bin Abdul Aziz the Imam of the era. And this was because he understood that Umar bin Abdul Aziz had a lot of knowledge that he wanted to impart upon other people, but he was also very knowledgeable himself. And this was something that he wanted other people to benefit from, but he also wanted other people to become knowledgeable themselves, and through doing so, impart wisdom and benefit to people throughout their community. So these were the three ways that Umar bin Abdul Aziz improved upon the knowledge of the existing people, but also left a legacy project to improve on the knowledge of people after him through firstly funding scholarship, through stopping the expansion of the caliphate and focusing on the existing education and development of the people, and thirdly through establishing a discipline of collecting ahadith that were clear and that were authentic in their nature. And I think Umar bin Abdul Aziz was also a very reforming caliph. His major area of reform for which he is remembered is in taxation. And what Umar bin Abdul Aziz did here was he decreased the amount of wealth that was coming to the caliphate, i.e. to the governing families, the Umayyad princes, and he diverted this wealth towards social reform, towards improving the life of the citizens, and through doing so, he created another paradigm shift in which the focus was not on the ruling parties, but it was on how the ruling parties could help the people. And one way to do this was through diverting wealth towards them. And this was achieved through reform in taxation. And I think that another key area for which Umar bin Abdul Aziz is sometimes not given much attention to is how he reformed Spain. And this is very interesting because when Spain was conquered by the Umayyads, then there's the famous story of Tariq bin Ziyad, who burnt the ships, and he essentially wanted to conquer a new region, and he wanted to burn all the ways that they could retreat or go back, because he wanted to spread Islam to that region. And Umar bin Abdul Aziz continued on that tradition. He wanted the people who were the most pious and the most knowledgeable to govern the area, not people who had just been appointed because they were relatives or they were friends of the rulers in Damascus. And this was a crucial thing because before Umar ibn Abdul Aziz's time, there was a focus on hereditary ascension to the positions of power. So that meant that if some position of power was within the family, then it would remain within the family, and that would be fiercely protected at all costs, regardless if whether the person was suitable for that role or not. And Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he changed that understanding of how we should govern, and he focused upon appointing rulers based upon their merits rather than on their lineage. And in Spain, this was what he introduced, and it allowed a golden age of Islam to come into Spain and into Europe at a time where there was the Dark Ages, where there wasn't enlightenment at all. And in fact, there was such a success in knowledge and in scholarship within Spain that the sons of monarchs within Europe would come to Spain to study, and they would go back to their own countries after they had learned from the best scholars of their time. In fact, I think it was one of the popes, he went to study in Spain as well, and then he went, after he had learned, back to the Vatican. So there was a tremendous importance that was placed upon education, but also upon the way in which education could be fostered, and that was through reforming the political leadership, which would encourage the citizens of the country to focus upon their talents and not rely upon a hereditary or a advantage that wasn't related to their merits. And one of the ways that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz did this was through showing himself that he was serious about electing leaders that had merits, because he didn't appoint his son to be the successor as Caliph, even though, ironically, his son, Abdul Malik, was a very, very knowledgeable scholar and very knowledgeable person. So he was a perfect fit for the role as Caliph, unlike the other Umayyad princes at the time. But the fact was that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz realized that if he set a precedent of appointing his son as the Caliph, then all the work that he had done to avoid nepotism flourishing within the political leadership of the Caliphate, all of that would have failed. And so he started reform at his home, and then he enacted elsewhere. And as a result, he did not appoint Abdul Malik as the successor of the Caliphate. And many people were surprised at the decision, but that was the wisdom of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, because he realized that this was not the right thing to do, and it was something that would not be consistent with his views in other areas. And I think finally we move on to the success of the reforms and the educational introductions that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz made during his time as Caliph. And I think success can be divided into two categories: success in this world and success in the afterlife. And success in this world is the least important of the two. Success in the afterlife is the most important. And what Umar ibn Abdul Aziz did was he didn't actually achieve success in this life, if we think about it in the conventional sense, because once he passed away, then the next caliph, he reversed all of the reforms that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz had made, essentially, completely wiping out the work and the effort that Umar ibn Abdul Aziz had made overnight. And in the conventional sense, that would look very suspicious to us, and it would look as if Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was not successful in his aims. But actually, if we look at it from the afterlife, and if we look at it even from the way Umar ibn Abdul Aziz is remembered now, through the session when talking about him, then he's remembered in a positive light because he did actions that would have pleased Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he had thought about these actions only to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the intention for him wasn't to favor, curry favor with his cousins, and through not enacting tax reforms, and through placating them, but it was through doing the right thing, which meant that he would face opposition within his own family and with his cousins, but it would be the right thing to do. And now we remember him because of his courage in that moment of hardship. And if we look at it from the afterlife perspective, then only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be the judge on whether Umar ibn Abdul Aziz was successful or not, but also whether we are successful or not in our actions. But what we can do is two things. We can purify our intentions, first of all. So we can, before we do any action, we make it purely for the sake of Allah, and if the world does not appreciate it, then we should have yaqeen. Sometimes it is very hard to do. Like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he had to face opposition from his family, and in fact he was killed. He was poisoned by his cousins, and he was killed by his family as a result of the effort that he made. Of course, we might not be treated in such an extreme manner, but we will face hardship in our life when we do things that people frown upon. For example, in cultural practices, if they go against Islam, then we have to say no, but that may mean that our family is disappointed with us, and we have to face that disappointment. So what the crucial thing is to realize is that our intention needs to be pure, and secondly, our actions that we do, they need to have a motivation behind them that is to benefit the people, but also to please Allah. So those two things. The first thing is to purify our intentions and to make sure our actions have the right motivations, and they are to benefit the people, so to create a good action within the world, but also to realize that this action is ultimately for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And another way to think about it is through looking at it from the perspective of the huququllah, the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the huququl ibad, so the rights of the people. And success is to ensure that both the rights of Allah and the rights of the people are achieved. And I think with that, inshallah, I'll talk to the Q&A and to the discussion. And I'll have a quick look on the Facebook page to look at any comments that have been sent in. And another way to think about it is through looking at it from the perspective. So I think there's no comments or questions. Anything you think about, then you can send a question or leave a comment, and we can inshallah pick up on that later as well. But I think that the crucial thing to take from this session is that Umar bin Abdul Aziz has a very dear part in our hearts as Muslims because of the effort that he made to help the Ummah, and that is something that is his legacy and will forever be his legacy. And the important thing for us to realize is that we can also leave a legacy. It doesn't have to be on such a large scale as Umar bin Abdul Aziz did, but we can leave a legacy within our own families, within our own circle. Whatever we are excelling at, whatever we are good at, we can really focus and specialize in that and benefit people through that activity. So whether if it's through being a historian, we can benefit people through teaching them about the mistakes that were made in the past so that we don't make those mistakes in the future. Or whether in business there's a new product that is beneficial for the people and people need, and it's creating that product. We can even do it from our own family, like Umar ibn Abdul Aziz did with not appointing his son Abdul Malik as the next caliph. We can create those types of environments in which we do the right thing within our family, and our family remembers us fondly and really appreciates us, even if other people do not. And inshallah, I'll end this session with a quote from Umar bin Abdul Aziz, which really summarizes his approach towards life. And I quote, he says, or rather he said, take care of your hereafter and Allah will take care of your worldly life. So that's take care of your hereafter and Allah will take care of your worldly life. Take care of your private life and Allah will take care of your worldly life. So it's this focus on having trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that we all pray inshallah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts our efforts and we achieve Jannatul Firdaus because of our actions and because of our intentions behind those actions. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.